One of my favorite things in Magic the Gathering is when you get a card that's absolutely powerful, but also comes with a fantastic backstory. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. We are here to talk about a newly spoiled Commander Legends card. Now, one of the cool things about Commander Legends is because it's bringing back all these old school cards, you get to have reimaginings of characters. So thus, I get to talk about really awesome characters from Magic's history that I just haven't had the ability to touch on so far because nothing came up that was relevant to go with them. So let us talk about the new version of Baron Sengir, and then we'll go over the whole history. Oh, dude, this is an insane story. Such a cool character. And the card itself, this new version of the Baron is so powerful, especially in comparison to like the previous version. So, I mean, granted, I guess you're going to play in Commander, so maybe the power level needs to be higher, but this card feels insane to me. 2 black and 4 for a 4/4 flyer. Whenever another creature dies, put 2+1/+1 counters on Sengir the Dark Baron. Whenever another player loses the game, you gain life equal to that player's life total as the turn began. That's a really interesting concept, right? Obviously, you can't gain their life total when they've lost the game if they've taken a bunch of damage. Who cares? I put them at -10. Okay, you gain -10. Wait, how does that work? Like, so it's just the wording of it is so funky. Like, when a player loses, whatever their life total was at the beginning of the turn, that's how much life you gain. And it's because you're absorbing the essence of another planeswalker. That's insane. And this thing's got partner too. The partner part, it doesn't feel like the Baron. Do you know what I mean? Like, I guess you'll probably get that better once we go through some of the backstory to go with him. It's the only part of the card that makes me go, doesn't feel like him, but at the same time, just makes the card more powerful for Commander players because you can use them with another commander. So whatever. That's a very minor thing for me that I'm not really willing to get hung up on. But let's take a look at the original Baron so that you can see the difference, okay? Because he originally came out in Homelands all the way back in 1995. And this card has a special place in a lot of people's hearts, okay? Because he's the original Vampire Lord. 3 black and 5 for a 5/5 flyer. One thing I want to note is that back in the day, big creatures usually had drawbacks or massive casting costs or both. So you're going to feel like when you look at this card, you're not getting your mana's worth for 8 mana, right? 8 mana for a 5/5 flyer. Whenever creatures put into the graveyard the same turn Baron Sengir damaged it, put a +2/+2 counter on Baron Sengir, which is still the wording, by the way. They never like errated it to be 2 +1/+1 counters. He literally uses +2/+2 counters. And you have to admit that compared to the original Sengir Vampire, which just got a +1/+1 whenever a creature it damaged went to the graveyard, this like +2/+2 felt more epic. And then you have the tap regenerate target vampire ability of him as well. So overall, in the old day, this was a difficult card to deal with. He was a real force. You know what I mean? I mean, the +2/+2 part didn't really matter that often because once he came out, usually it meant you were going to lose soon anyways. But either way, it's all just like feel good from back in the day. And the flavor text says, "Beast Defiler, the source of all my pain." And that's a quote from Ison Shade. Now, Ison, Lord Ison, is a cool character that is involved with the Baron story. But honestly, the whole thing about the Baron, we actually know a fair bit about this character. And it's pretty cool to go back and like look at his story. I forgot how awesome all of this is. And we'll cover like the story more in depth on my lore channel where we talk in depth about Magic stories. But like to cover it in more broad strokes, basically, Baron started out as the son of a nobleman, obviously another Baron, right? So he starts out as the son of a small local sort of noble, not like super rich or anything, but his father had started to dabble in black magic. Now, because he's dabbling in black magic and animating corpses, he needs bodies to ensorcel, essentially. So he summons up plague rats to infest the city and like attack the villagers and stuff to provide the bodies that he needs. Now, Baron originally wasn't necessarily a bad guy, but he was raised by a bad person and inevitably turned out to be just completely dreadful. But at the beginning, he is actually not on board with what his father is trying to do. He's on a quest to try, his father's essentially trying to attain immortality as a vampire, and is also bringing Baron with him on this journey, forcing Baron to sleep in coffins and stuff that Baron really wasn't down with. So Baron wanted to overthrow his father. However, he also wanted to maintain the barony for himself. So there was these contesting sort of like, what his dad's doing is wrong, but at the same time, Baron also had a lust for power for himself. And so he stumbled on this young girl who could use magic, and he convinced her to help him in his quest to get rid of his father, because if somebody other than him ends his father's life, then he can inherit the barony. But if he was to take his father's life, then he wouldn't be able to inherit the barony himself, right? So he basically enlists the aid of this girl, teaches her enough black magic that she can control the plague rats. So with like a little song, essentially, right? So at this point, that's when, and I'm doing this in really like broad strokes here, we'll cover it more in detail later on. So Baron goes to confront his father along with this girl. This girl uses the magic to control the rats. And the problem is, though, it turns out that Baron's father, being more skilled in black magic than Baron, right? He already knows the magic to control the rats. I mean, he's the one who summoned them. Big flaw with the plan, right? So what happens is Baron's father also knows the controlling magic. So the rats originally go for Baron's father, but then he enacts the magic. So now all of a sudden the rats have two different ones that are their controllers, and they go for the only one in the room who doesn't have control magic going on with them, essentially. And so they go after Baron, and they leap at him and tear apart his throat. And he just falls lifeless to the ground. At that exact moment, Baron's father chants out this dark magic that actually saves Baron and converts him into a vampire, all right? And then what actually happens is Baron starts getting summoned around to different planes of existence. You have to understand that this was the old Homelands times, and how things worked back then was the original way that magic was concepted. Like, now the way they tell you it works is you summon up constructs or copies of things that you've seen on your travels. They're not real. They're just like, I pulled this magical being from the aether, but it's an exact copy, but it's not the real thing. Originally, how magic worked is you and I are planeswalkers, right? We go to different planes and we actually summon up these creatures to serve us, and it's the real thing. So when you have a legendary creature like Baron Sengir, there's literally only one in existence, right? He's the real deal. You're not summoning up a copy of him. You're summoning the actual Baron. So the Baron had actually been summoned by a bunch of different planeswalkers throughout like hundreds and hundreds of years, until ultimately the planeswalker that had summoned him lost the battle they were engaged in and fled. That's the idea. If you and I are like having a game of magic, we're both contesting planeswalkers. If you concede, that's the equivalent of you fleeing the plane that we're both on and just leaving the victory to me, right? Whereas obviously if either player goes to zero, that's the destruction of the planeswalker, which is why they're more likely to flee. But under the old circumstances, whatever you had summoned up, you didn't have time to send it back to where it came from because you had to flee. So all of that is left there as spoils for the new planeswalker, or if they're not interested in it, like if you're summoning up black creatures and they're a white mage, then they're just like, I've got no use for this stuff. So they just get abandoned. In fact, there's a number of magic novels that cover storylines that involve planeswalkers and abandoned summons and stuff, and it adds to the game. It really makes it feel different when you are summoning up real beings. You know what I mean? Like the construct thing helps with any kind of moral quandaries you may have about the, like, okay, but you're forcing these to fight against their will or whatever. Some of them you may have convinced to join you. Either way, it's a situation where the construct concept makes it easy to sidestep that moral quandary. However, the Baron existed back in the time where how it worked was you get summoned to these different locations. So he ended up on the world of Overworld, which is where the Homelands world is set and where we know most of the Baron's story from. That's where he ends up getting abandoned. And he slowly but surely rises to power there. He spreads his corruption. He starts to extend his territory out as much as possible. He is setting different factions against each other, essentially to weaken them. He originally just wiped out the Anzarans altogether. He just laid them to waste. There's the Anzaran Ruins card is literally the only reference to them. It's pretty nutty, the stuff that he got up to. He went after the dwarves. He zombified a bunch of them, destroyed the rest. They wouldn't really like kneel to him at first. So he essentially kidnapped the daughter of the Dwarf King and then corrupted her with dark magic and turned her into his own daughter, which is just like, that's crazy, crazy evil, right? And I mentioned Ice and Shade earlier in the video as well. What happened with Ison in very, very rough terms is Ison basically was given these visions when he was young. He dreamed of destroying the Baron. And so as he grew up, he dedicated himself to the cause. He became a paladin, right? And like a really well-known, renowned paladin. And he went and offered himself up to the Baron because the Baron was known for making tons of undead servants, right? The Baron would make crazy amounts of vampires and other undead. In fact, in his lands, he had made it a crime to dismember any sort of bodies that are laying around or anything like that. Like the undead were a protected class essentially in any state, and the dead as well. So he basically would just mess around with any number of these people. So Ison's idea was, I'll go to him and I'll pledge myself to him and he'll turn me into a vampire. Now, the Baron had been around long enough, right? Like, he kept the knowledge of other planes' existence to himself. So he's the only one, really, with the exception of visiting planeswalkers, which would have a difficult time getting there at the time because there was a magical containment covering there's so much to talk about, man. That's why I need to do like the full lore videos on the other channel. I'm trying to give you just enough information without overloading it. But anyways, the Baron is one of the few people who knows that there's other planes of existence, right? And so his depth of understanding of a lot of different things is greater. He's not going to fall for such a simple trick. So instead of turning Ison into a vampire, he drains all his blood and then raises him as a shade who's bound to this signet ring. Now, Ison is still completely sane. He's completely aware of what's going on, but he's bound to serve whoever wears this ring. And he's essentially forced to become the Baron's like biggest supporter, the leader of his armies and everything like that. And all the while, the crazy dwarf daughter of the Baron, she lusts after that ring because she wants to control Ice and Shade, not to wage any kind of battles, not to take power from the Baron, just to break Ison's mind. She literally just wants to drive him deeper into insanity. So that's the sort of like crazy stuff that Baron gets up to, right? There's all kinds of more details that, again, we will go into. But regardless, he spreads his domain more and more. His plan is to set like all the different settlements against each other so they wear each other down. Ultimately, he has found a portal hidden deep in the Dwarven ruins, right? And he knows that portal will take him to another plane of existence, but it's a one-way trip. So he is also enlisting the aid of as many living beings that aren't bound to his will, but are serving him willingly as humanly, or I guess vampirely possible, I guess, to use the phrase as it should be used in this case. So he has taken a bunch of people from different settlements, essentially kidnapped them, forced them to relocate in his lands, and he's using that to slowly build the ranks of individuals, because once he goes to that portal, it's a one-way trip. So he's not really going to go through the portal until he's ideally dominated all of Overworld. So his plans go on further and further, successfully setting all these different groups against each other, weakening them. And then we actually get a glimpse of the future at one point in the Magic storyline where somebody visits the plane of Overworld and the entirety of it is covered by a gigantic undead army in the service of the Baron. So he is clearly successful in the end at doing what he wants to do. Now that is the like very, very abbreviated version. I will cover Baron Sengir lore way more in depth over on my other channel, Fantasy Geographic, where we talk about the stories and the lore and all that. But since this is a spoiler video, obviously it's happening over here. So let me know your thoughts about all of this in the comments below. If you like what I'm doing, comment, like, subscribe. It's all great for the channel. It is appreciated. If you love what I'm doing, hop on the Patreon and be a part of the goodness. And other than that, thanks for coming by, everyone. I will see you all again very soon.